I'm Tony Lockwood, founder of Thompson Wright Partners, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the latest episode of Inside Track, where I discuss business transformation journeys with leading figures in industry. I'm delighted to welcome Simon Berkeley onto the show today. His initial career within oil exploration led him to join a management consultancy firm, and it's that experience that he's taken throughout his career. So let me introduce you to him now.
Hi Simon, thanks for agreeing to join us today. You have vast experience of working in change and transformation, having operated across multiple sectors and organisations for somewhere approaching 30 years, I think. And I think when we spoke, you mentioned that you'd operated in over 25 different countries. So yeah. I'm sure this episode will be really interesting as you share your thoughts and experience gained through all these activities and programs you've been involved in. But let's start by just giving us a quick introduction to yourself, a little bit brief summary of your career to date, and how you transitioned into the world of change and transformation in the first place.
Okay, yeah. Well, yes, my original business, I was quite fortunate actually, although I wasn't sure about it at the time. I started off working in the oil business, in the sharp end, if you like, in the drilling business. Yeah. So because I'd done science in college and I got interested in this quite towards the end. And so I found myself in the North Sea. We're working on high hazard drilling operations, and then very quickly moved on to the Middle East, And it was really a fantastic opportunity, a fantastic business to start off in, if you like, because it gave me a lot of skills at the time that I took for granted because I thought everyone was doing the same thing. But later on, they've stood me in good stead. And also, to be honest, Tony, I'd always had this ambition to travel. I love going to really interesting and sometimes more remote places that you wouldn't normally get to. And that was part of the attraction of the oil business. It gave me the opportunity to do that. So I worked offshore, mostly in the North Sea and the Middle East, and some in the States for about 8 years. And what really got me interested in consulting with a couple of things. First of all, a friend of mine put me onto it. But secondly, we were when we were working in drilling operations, because it's such a high hazard operation. The quality of our teamwork was actually really, really good. We didn't think so at the time. We weren't trained in team building, but when you're put on an operation like that with people from different backgrounds, different language, cultures, prejudices, and also different technical disciplines, you had to learn very quickly to operate as a team and work.
It's almost being thrown into the deep end there, isn't it? Really?
Exactly, that's right. Yeah,
sink or swim almost.
Exactly. When you're drilling a new hole, basically, for technical reasons, the hole has to be unstable all the time for you to get through the Earth's crust. So you're deliberately making it unstable. Yeah. So if you take your eye off the ball as a team, you can lose control over a well in 20 minutes or half an hour, and then you're finished, So that meant that we had to be really focused and really effective as teams. But what surprised me, as I grew up in that business and started working more and more in the oil company offices in town before I went offshore, helping with the well planning, I became really surprised at how ineffective and how siloed the organizations were of the people working in town, And these were people in big global multinational oil companies. We were having to work with collaborative groups across the functions, but we found when we went into town that the geophysicists weren't talking to the geologists weren't talking to the drilling people, and so on. We'd have to go tramp around. What is it with these people? And just beginning coming to make a decision on something or get somewhere, they'd say, "Oh, it's 5 o'clock now. We're going home." And you say, "We can't go home. The thing might blow up." So it was a very interesting start, and I became fascinated by how people behave in organizations, and why they were so ineffective and why they didn't work so well. And
so really, in reality, though, there was multiple cultures, wasn't there, in that organisation? There was the culture out in the field of major teamwork and that sort of drive to collaborate very, very effectively, and then in the office, then a culture of, completely different. I won't try to describe that culture, but a completely different culture, shall we say.
It was, that's right, yeah. And the office thinking they know best, and the guys on the rig saying, well, never mind what the office thinks, we've got to do this, And of course, in those days, communications was hard anyway. So you had to be able to work autonomously and not rely on town to support you on things sometimes. Connections can be quite poor. So I just became very interested in this, and a friend of mine had just taken an MBA and put me onto it, and I came back to the UK basically and went into Imperial College and did an MBA there just to find out a little bit more from a theoretical perspective. How does management supposed to work?
Yeah.
And that was pretty good. And I chose Imperial because it was quite highly respected in the oil and gas business. It's always been a big centre for geoscience, so when I knew that even when I graduated, I might well be working back in the same business. So since then, well, I worked in a couple of roles immediately afterwards, and then was fortunate enough to join Gemini Consulting in the mid-90s.
Yeah.
And that was my first entry into large-scale transformation, really sophisticated strategic transformation consulting, and that was, again, another fortunate thing for me because I worked alongside some great people, and we had some really good mechanisms for understanding how change works in a business and managing change in big complex organizations. And it was to say it was no one technique, it was a package of quite simple methods that were put together and were really effective. The front end of the package was we had very smart strategy people who could come in and make a big, really get to the bottom of what the strategy would be. They were very creative, but also they had a way of presenting strategy in a way that mobilized the organization. And we use the term mobilization to mean really hearts and minds. They either scare the hell out of the people in the organization as to what would happen if they didn't do this change, or get them tremendously excited about it. And it was that mobilization and that momentum in the organization that then was the platform for us to come in and do the implementation side. So it was that combination of strategy and implementation skills and the way the projects were designed and set up in the organization that helped to build that momentum.
Yes. And how did your experience of being on the front line help you in that? Because you will have seen both sides, wouldn't you? Really?
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. As I said, Tony, it was only when I got into consulting for a while I realised the benefits of the drilling stuff and the drilling experience had given me. It was I think a resilience. Yeah, just being able to cope with anything that came up and not really get stressed out about it, which was essential for working offshore, but also that thing of parachuting in with a completely weird polyglot of people from all the different backgrounds and being able to roll up the sleeves and get on with them quickly and be effective. I think all of that was absolutely necessary in these big major transformation programs as well. And again, in the drilling business, again, if you see something you're not quite sure of or something like that, you have to be not afraid to go straight into the rig boss, say, look, we've got to do something here, and you've got to get his or her attention, get something done about it quickly. And again, all those skills and ways of working stood me in good stead for consulting as well. Gemini recognized that, and they hired from a huge range of different backgrounds, mostly operations rather than consulting, and it was a very helpful background. And I was, again, privileged to work with Gemini. I was working for about 4 years, and really all of the management consulting methods, tools, techniques that I practice today and I've been practicing since, basically I learned at Gemini. Most of the time, especially when I'm working as a freelancer, I find myself working back with alumni of Gemini Consulting because we speak the same language, we know the same methods, and we can.
Absolutely, and there's that element of know, like, and trust, isn't there? So that always makes it know, like, and trust. It always makes it a lot easier to work with people that you know, that you like, and you trust, and the fact that you've worked together in the past just makes it a lot easier, and you can move forward a lot quicker.
That's right. Yeah. That's all that.
That leads me into a question that we tend to ask everybody who comes onto onto the podcast. But how do you define transformation?
Yes, it's a good question because there's lots of different definitions. For me, transformation is a multidimensional change in an organization. It refers to it's typically where there's some big thing has happened. Either there's a cost crisis or a structural change, or a huge opportunity has opened up in the environment, or if there's a major merger being decided, something really big has happened, and the organization has realized that it needs to make a change that would typically be a huge culture change across the organization. It might take 3 or 4 years, but they have to do it in a year or two. So almost by definition, transformation is making change happen in the organization faster than natural change processes would allow. And for me, a transformation really has to involve a change in strategy that requires a change in organization, business processes in particular, sometimes radical change, and typically these days, a change in terms of technology, the use of technology. Okay. Now, there is an interesting thing, we'll come back to this. Today, a vast majority, I think, of transformation programs seem to be driven by the availability of a particular technology or a new type of technology and the decision to take it on board. And sometimes, in quite a lot of quarters in the consulting industry, by definition, transformation is we have to transform the organization to use this new technology properly. Yeah. And I think that's a mistake, typically.
That's the tail wagging the dog, isn't it, a lot of the time?
Exactly, that's right. For me, so to summarize, I suppose, for me, a transformation is something that an organization has to do in order to implement a radically different business strategy of some kind.
We spoke about this on an earlier show, and we were saying that it all starts with having an absolute clarity around the vision and the strategy. And then once you're clear about that, then you can start to put together the components of that transformation.
Yes.
Which technology might be one element, the people, the process, etc. But without having that, without spending the time up front to getting clarity around the vision and the strategy, then the foundations are just not in place for that transformation.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And I've come across various different scenarios. I've come across cases where there was a clear vision, but it was held by a very small group of people. Yeah. And they assumed, they were so excited about it, they assumed that having done that, all they'd have to do is design the processes and do the technology so that it would all work. But there's work to be done within the transformation program to spread that vision and have it shared by more people in their own words, in their own way, and make it do it in a way that they think they thought of it themselves, in a sense.
Just on that, then, in the roles that you've been involved in, how have you achieved that? Because I absolutely agree. One of the big challenges is, as you say, getting the strategy that is typically developed within a relatively small group of people, getting that understood in a consistent way, getting people to buy into it in a consistent way, and then moving forward. And that's a major challenge for a lot of organizations. So I'd be interested just to understand your experience of how you've been able to help organizations achieve that.
Yeah, it is a good point. I think I really fall back on the methods that Gemini taught me in the mid-90s. But now, to be fair, a lot of other people practice today as well, which is the vision. You start with the vision wherever it's captured in it, heads and hearts of the senior leaders, plus 2 of the PowerPoint packs typically. But then you have to set up and design and run the program in a way that enables that to be shared more widely. And you can quickly, in the beginning of a program, or typical start is a series of senior and mid-level interviews, and some walk arounds the sites, the operations, and talk to people on the ground and see what people, what their perception is of what the new strategy is. You build up a picture then quickly as to how widely it's shared, how widely it's understood. And then you have to set up a number of workshops or interventions of some kind, which on the surface are about sharing, but actually are more, in the way they're designed, they're more creative things where you get people to think that to create it, what it means for their function, for their department, for their role, in the way they think they thought of it themselves. So it can sometimes look to a client as if you're doing the strategy workshop all over again. Yeah. But sometimes if it's a large scale and really complex and difficult change in the organization, sometimes you just have to do that. In Gemini, we call it brown paper mapping. In that as-is mapping, you get people to splurge again on what their problems and frustrations are, and in the 2B, you get people excited about what it could be. And you have, when I say people, you have middle management, junior management, and senior management all involved in quite a carefully managed way. So they are talking to one another in a way that they perhaps might not have done. They often haven't done so before, and that gives management the opportunity to try and share their vision a bit more with people, because the people a bit more opportunity, because it makes them feel that they've been heard. And
Absolutely.
Again, the classic thing with behaviour in organisations is quite often a change disrupts or affects people and their role and so on in a way that they don't like, they never wanted, they can't see, they don't think it's right for their business. It's classed as resistance, but actually sometimes if you design the change and you have that dialogue, you make sure that those conversations have been held, and use brown paper mapping, for example, as a mechanism to facilitate that, then even if it's something that they didn't like or didn't want, at least they've had that conversation. They understand, and you'd be surprised, people are much more accepting of and will get behind a change, even if it's one they didn't think they wanted, once they feel they've been heard and they've had that dialogue.
Absolutely. And I think there's two things that came out of that. One, which is it's important that the team, individual teams, individual departments, etc., are able to translate into their own language, because then they take ownership of it, which always helps in driving the change. As you were explaining the approach that you take, it sort of reminded me of something you said right at the start from your days in the mines, where when you're drilling, you have to make it almost unstable. And there's a sense of that coming through in those workshops. I remember doing one in the naval base down in Portsmouth many years ago, and exactly the same. We had that brown paper on the wall, that same process, and the starting point was making the teams and as you say, senior right down to junior members of the team unstable in what they do now. And highlighting why it needs to change almost, in making that. And once you've done that, then they could break away from the as is and start to really think about the to be. But until you got that element of the instability, there were no, we have to work in this way, we have to do it in this way, and it takes some time. I remember we tried to do it once and we got part of the way, but when you sort of think at the end, you think we never really we didn't nail that, so we brought them back and did it again and really forced the issue, and it worked very well in the second time.
We used to hold those, we planned those and orchestrated those as is and to be workshops very carefully. We made them off sites, in the case of a big oil and gas operator or energy company, diverse energy company in Finland, we actually took them on one of those offshore booze cruises that the Scandinavians like so much, But what we forgot to tell them was that it wasn't going to be any booze until we finished the workshop. But it was, the symbolic power of taking them off onto this ship and cruising around the Baltic for a while. Okay, we've only got a day. Let's see what we can hammer through this and redesign the way we're going to do things. Taking people away from the organisation helps to dislodge the thinking, and yes, sometimes is a place where you can make people feel really uncomfortable. And if it's interesting, that thing about making people feel uncomfortable, later on in my career, when I started working more and more in programs that were technology driven, end-to-end ERP programs, and I found myself working with people who came from a purely IT background, I'd say, okay, what have we done on the as is and the to be? Well, the as is, we never mind the as is, it's a mess. So the to be is this system will be in and it'll be running perfectly and everyone will love it, And we expect resistance, and people will hate it because they don't like new systems. And that's making them feel uncomfortable. They don't like the new system coming in. But as soon as they see it, of course, they'll get excited about it. And I said to them, no, it's not the new system. That's not the level of discomfort. We need to, first of all, understand what the as is and the to be and the extent of change that people need to make, right down to people's roles, responsibilities, get them to see or to help design the map, and then realize what it is going to have to, what are you going to have to do in order to make this? We keep asking people, what do you think is going to happen? What are you going to have to do in order to make this work? And that's, you have to engineer that level of discomfort where they feel, they know they're going to have to do something differently themselves. And it's not just use a new system that they don't like the look of. It's more than that.
Yeah, it is, and it is taking those people on that journey. We keep coming back to this every time because it's just an absolute critical element of change, isn't it? But it's taking individuals on that journey, because even within a team that might have worked very well previously, different people will move on that journey at different times and will need different support elements almost to take them on that journey.
Yeah.
Not because they're negative about the change, it's just that they're uncertain about,
Yeah.
and it always starts on, well, what does it mean for me?
Yes.
And the sooner you can answer that question, the better.
Yeah.
And equally, if you don't know, in my experience, it's better to say, we don't know.
Yeah.
But work with us and we'll be able to find out.
Exactly. The people who come from an IT background, they would typically start the program. There would be a strategic objective and a pack, a big business case and strategy for what the ERP was designed to do. And then they bring in teams of coders, sometimes working offshore, to trawl through the organization to basically put in place the code for all the different processes and sub-processes and so on. And when often the as is and the to be would be discussed and understood by the senior people, and there'd be an understanding of what transition needed to happen. As the project proceeded and as new coders were brought on and so on, there'd be a bit of a loss of understanding of this. So the coders, I within lots of workshops where I find a mid-level or junior coder talking to a mid-level or junior manager saying, okay, I need to work on this process. Part of this, we need to see, how do we raise invoices? So how do you raise invoices? And the guy in the business way, well, I raise invoices this way. And I'd come in and say, well, hang on, is this the as-is way of invoicing or the to-be way? Because we've already agreed there's going to be there's the current way of doing things, and with the ERP, in order to leverage the business benefits from it, we need to do things in a different way. So is there a difference between the two? And the coder didn't know. And he just said, no, just tell me how you, and he would end up coding for the as-is. And the business person, comparatively junior person in the business, wouldn't know either. And again, you just tell them what the as-is was. So that's where the loss of integrity occurs, and why so many ERP programs, in my view, don't deliver what they're supposed to deliver, because, and it's the fault really of the program manager and the program team, not cascading down that understanding of the difference and ensuring everybody in the team really understands whether they are coding for the as-is or the to-be,
Absolutely. And I always find that sometimes where organizations have got very well-defined processes, well-defined documented processes, let's be clear about that. Reality doesn't reflect those documentation. And people will treat the documented processes as is.
Yes.
And then look to move to 2B, but actually, you're not starting from the right place, because there's usually processes built upon top of processes and built upon top of processes, and reality never reflects what's documented down. Exactly. And it's as you say, that brown paper exercise at least gets you into the place where you get what's happening on the ground.
Yes.
And that's the right starting point.
Exactly. And I don't know if you find this, but I find it really hard sometimes to convince people to do workshops and brown papers, because they say, oh no, we've got this fabulous BPM tool now. We'll just sit down, guys, on, especially these days. And Zoom. Well, you've had to do it recently, but I mean, even before the pandemic came along, we'll just sit down on this video conference call and we'll BPM it, No, it's not about the software. We need to work on happy. And that physically getting people up to talk and through all diagrams on flip chart and so on actually flushes out how does it actually.
It's the nuances, isn't it, that comes out in that, because even within a team that works very well together, the likelihood is that 2 or 3 people will do the same activity in a slightly different way. Yeah. And it's the nuances that come out through that discussion that really illuminates the plans moving forward.
Yeah. And also you find with those things, sometimes you'll spot, this is one thing that I find quite common, you'll spot a particular way of doing things that somebody has found or discovered in another part of the business. And actually it's got potential for benefit across the whole business. And it was never discovered in the initial diagnostic, that you've got to be prepared for new innovations coming out that you can get across the business,
So being clear about the as is to be is obviously one of your key strands in terms of managing that transformation. What are some of the other things that you are essential elements of successful transformation, do you think?
There's another element that I find quite challenging to deal with at the moment, and that is there's a convention grown up in the last, I would say, 15 years or so, where program management and change management are seen as 2 separate and different disciplines. And I've been in lots of forums with people like yourself who work on transformation quite a lot and have agreed with me that they shouldn't be. But that's still too widespread. So in my view, as I understand it, the term program management is taken to mean somebody who knows how to do the software engineering, if you like, and plan the program. And a typical program manager works in a waterfall way. It's an engineering discipline, if you like. And change management is perceived by program managers as being some sort of black box. But if they think about it at all, it's about communicating with people and convincing people to do something differently, selling them a thing to them and training them up, there's lots of debates as to whether program managers should understand change management and change management should understand. I think my own view is that it's a mistake to think of those two disciplines as separate. And if we stick for the moment in conventional program management, the reason why program management, you can see why it grew into being a big and important discipline. You can see where Prince 2 and so on came about, was that software and systems are so complex, they have to be treated like an engineering asset. So you have to have a waterfall engineering project with stage gates, and you be clear in each stage gate exactly what you've achieved, and make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed before you move on to the next stage. So you can see why it came about. Engineering discipline was necessary as software became more complicated, but engineering discipline does not take into account that some of the that you're dealing with people changing, and people who come from an engineering background and a software engineering background tend to think of the people in the organization as components of the system, if you like.
It's interesting. I was working in a national utility firm a few years back, and I remember having a heated discussion because they were looking to put a major transformation together, and they were looking to bring project managers in and change managers in, and keep them completely separate as two entities. And it's like, you can't do that. It's a recipe for disaster. And we had this debate, and it took probably, I would say, 2 months before I got my way. It was constantly going back again, breaking down that element, and when you sort of step back and reflect, and what you've just said there, I think was very apt for them, because they're an engineering business, so they run their engineering activities as projects. So their perception of project management is driven through a lens of engineering discipline. But when you're doing a transformation in an organization, the biggest element of that transformation is the people. So almost you've got to lead by the people side rather than the engineering discipline of project. Because the easiest thing in the world is to do the activity. The hardest thing is to get the people to change. So you're almost reversing, aren't you, that sort of preconceived idea that actually project management is the key.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, there's two other aspects of the engineering thinking which are damaging. I mean, it all can be fixed if you've got a program manager who does understand change management, prepared to partner with the change management person and just listen to them. So you can have it as two separate disciplines. But another aspect is that's unhelpful is this focus on documentation. This grew up in the software business primarily in Y2K, when to their embarrassment, most IT people realized they'd never properly documented the software that they created some years back. So documentation became the thing, to the point where in an engineering project, it's not done until it's documented. But if you try applying that to change management, and I had this argument with a number of engineering program managers, where they say, "I've only got we're going live in a few weeks' time. We've already done all the coding and configuration, and nobody's very happy, so you can't go talk to anybody. But we need you to produce some deliverables, change management deliverables. So here's a a matrix for a stakeholder engagement plan. Here's a matrix for this. Here's a matrix for that. Go in and fill it. Populate these Excels. I said, well, if I need to talk to these stakeholders to see what their perceptions are and see how we can engage them, see what their influence is. And oh, don't go and talk to any of them. Just write it down. And just produce the deliverable, and it's going to be done in 2 days' time. And so people wanted me to produce deliverables. In the end, I left the organization. There were a number of people I was able to work very well with, but it was quite difficult, especially in the ERP programs, to really get past this thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I totally agree. And in the example I was showing earlier, then that's exactly what happened there. It was, well, we've got a change impact assessment, we've got stakeholder analysis form that you've got to complete, and these are standard forms, and it's our way of delivering programs or projects.
Yeah.
And it was, as you say, it was a tick box exercise, and they almost wanted to do it to demonstrate that they considered the change, but not
actually
done anything about it. So
that
interesting.
When I produced the plan, I'd say, now who's going to implement this? Or now I've got to go and implement it. No, you can go now. We've got a budget for it. I said, producing a plan is the start of the project. And they said, no, this is the end point. This is the deliverable we have to produce. And I said, no, that's just a plan for what we need to do in stakeholder engagement.
Yeah. So we've said a number of times during the session today about how stressful it can be for the people that are involved in receiving the change, or equally those who are involved in delivering the change. What do you do to sort of alleviate that stress for you personally?
It's funny you asked that question, though, because I have had a couple of people over the years saying to me, why you never get stressed out. And I do take it back to that experience I mentioned earlier on. It's genuinely true when you're working a drilling operation on an open hole situation. This is before you've cased off the hole and it becomes a production asset. When you're just trying to make the hole, it's deliberately in an unstable state. And you really can. Every drilling operation is about half an hour away from a total blowout.
Right.
At all times until they've cased it off, and the whole focus of the work is to prevent that blowout happening. But that you have to put it in that unstable situation. So sometimes, if I'm in a really stressful, difficult situation at work, when I'm standing there in front of a workshop and everyone's up against it, I sometimes think, what's the worst thing that can happen? Well, I'm not gonna be blown to smithereens. You know what I mean? Which is what the situation was for 8 solid years.
And it reminds me, we've had a number of people on previous episodes that are ex-forces, and they say exactly the same. It's when you've been in a war zone, or you've been going into situations that you could turn around a corner and you could stand on a landmine and stuff. Then actually getting some difficult stakeholders in a room and having a heated debate about change. It doesn't really affect me.
No, it's very interesting you mentioned that, because I had never, having grown up in Ireland, obviously it's not a very military country at all, and I'd never really worked with people with an ex-military background until I worked in Gemini, and they had quite a few of them. And to me, there's something about the training and development of military people that makes them, they're better than most people at organizational work, at really understanding how people behave in an organization and moving it forward. It's a combination, they're putting stress in situations, but I think the army is obviously, and the forces are obviously really good at training people in organizational change and transformation, all the different, in how people behave in organizations and how to lead people through a big change or through a difficult situation. And I've worked with some really great change people that come from around. Yeah.
I remember one, Chris, a few weeks back, he was talking about trust, and it is all about trust. And he's saying when he was in any situation, his number one responsibility was to make sure that the person to the left of him and the person to the right of him were okay.
Yeah.
And he knew that they were doing exactly the same thing. So as a team, they always had 2 people looking after you.
Yeah.
And making sure that you were okay, and it was built around that complete trust in the team. Yeah. And I remember saying at the time, if we could sort of take that and put it into organisations, change would be easy.
Yeah,
and that's what we should try. That's what we should be trying to do, really, building that team and that trust within the organisation.
Yeah, there's some. It's interesting you mentioned that. There's some very interesting methods and theories. Again, that I've been privileged to work with. I worked with a small boutique organisation a few years back, who did some really excellent work on trust and building trust in organisations through some methods that are known as commitment-based management. I don't know if you've come across that.
Yeah.
And originally pioneered by a fellow called Fernando Flores, who's still out there and still doing webinars. And they had a series of really good methods about all in the interest of building trust in organizations, about starting small and simple processes, getting people to make offers to their colleagues, the people next to them, the customers, their suppliers, designing those offers, making commitments based on those offers, identifying what conditions would be acceptable, would make this commitment acceptable, and then tracking back, giving feedback, getting the customer to give feedback on whether they received the thing the right way. And there's several other what they call speech acts, so specific formal ways of communicating in organizations, things like making declarations, things like basically making promises and keep sticking to your promises.
Yeah.
And then starting with small, simple things, building that out into a whole network of commitments and promises to oil the wheels of a process and make it work smoothly and effectively. And through working in that way, then everybody in the organization gradually builds trust with other people in the organization. And with that foundation, you can do anything.
But I always remember the key to commitment-based management is for people to be accepting that I am not going to make a commitment that I don't believe that I can deliver, even though you might want me to do. And so that peer pressure, right. You've got to accept that peer pressure. You can't have peer pressure in that situation, can you? Yeah. Because you need people to be fully focused upon only committing to stuff that they can actually deliver. So we're coming towards the end now, Simon. So we always finish off with the question that sort of, what's your number one takeaway? What's your one thing that you could boil all your experience down? What would be the one thing that you would recommend that people take account of?
Yeah, well, there's two things really. The one thing, again, referring back to what we mentioned earlier, and what I've learned in particular relevant today because of the whole focus around digital and technology and so on, that innovation is where it is at the moment. That's the key thing people are trying to implement in order to beat the competition. But understanding that innovation is a process and not an idea, and differentiating between the two. So people often think innovation is there's a new app, there's a new technology out there, or we've had an idea, we can do this. The idea is only the start of the process. The innovation is actually making it work. And I often, I love this story. If you ever read about Tim Berners-Lee experience in getting ARPANET, the original internet, accepted. The design and the coding for it was done in space of a few hours, but it took him years tramping around all of these different universities, talking to everybody, trying to get them to experiment with this new method of getting machines to communicate with one another. So the innovation is the process, not the idea itself. And the second thing, again, something we've mentioned a little bit earlier, is the key takeaway, if you like, for what underlies a lot of the best transformation methods is working with organizations in a way that enables them to, or working with people in a way that enables them to do things differently in a way they think they thought of it themselves. Yeah. And this might sound a cliche, but what gets me out of bed in the morning, what makes me satisfied in doing the work, is when people come back to me and say, look, we did this, we didn't think we could do this. And there was one particular business where we'd made a big change happen, and a large part of it was about getting the leadership engaged and leading that change, and we'd run a series of workshops and we'd pull people in, and people were coming back to me, it's astonishing. Suddenly I found the chief executive, chief of operations, we're acting in the way that, and we've been trying to convince them to do that for years, and now they're doing it. And they weren't even saying, you helped us or you did that, although that came out a bit later on. Their first thought was, we'd seen this big change. We did it. You know, we managed to make it work. We ran these workshops and we made it work. And this time the leadership were doing it. So that's what is key to it myself is getting people to work in such a way, asking them the questions that make them realize what it is they have to do differently and think they thought of it themselves. And hey, I came up with a great idea. You didn't tell me to do it this way. That, in fact, makes me more than satisfied.
Yeah, that and that's the skill of the facilitator, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah, and it is again something that Gemini taught us from the off. You know, so it's all around facilitation. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Simon. Thanks for your time today, and I'm sure people have taken at least one or two key ideas forward from this show. So,
once again, thank you, Simon. If you've enjoyed this show, please do subscribe and leave a message or comment. It's very much appreciated. And also check out what we're doing at the Transformation Leaders Hub and come along to one of our virtual networking sessions. Simon will be involved in many of those, so a great opportunity to follow up on the conversation today. See you in a couple of weeks.